Welcome to Pregnancy Help News Brief. I'm Lisa Bourne, Managing Editor of Pregnancy Help News. Once again, a lot has happened since our last Pregnancy Help News Brief, so let's get to the news. Pregnancy Help News was on the ground in Washington, D.C. for the National March for Life, associated events, and the Students for Life National Pro-Life Summit. The March for Life was especially joyful this year, with the new administration having been inaugurated earlier in the week, and with the numerous pro-life policy wins that unfolded throughout the week. Arguably capturing the most headlines was President Trump's pardoning of 23 pro-life advocates who had been targeted by the Biden Justice Department for their peaceful witness to life at abortion facilities. Some of the pro-life advocates had been imprisoned, and they were released as pro-life pilgrims converged upon Washington, D.C. for the march. I was blessed to hear remarks from one of the pro-life advocates, Paul Vaughn, at an event hosted by Thomas More Society, the pro-life legal nonprofit that is representing him. There were sightings of some of the other pro-life activists around the nation's capital during the time of the march as well. Also among the pro-life wins occurring during the week of the march were President Trump indicating support for the Bourne Abortion Survivors Protection Act, passed by the U.S. House of Representatives January 23rd, his reinstating the Mexico City policy and announcing that the United States would rejoin the Geneva Consensus Declaration, an executive order enforcing the Hyde Amendment, and, in an executive order affirming that there are two sexes, President Trump affirmed that life begins at conception. President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance both addressed the March for Life crowd, Vice President Vance in person and President Trump with a video address. Pregnancy Help was referenced and praised during speeches at the March for Life rally. President Trump said, quote, "We will work to offer a loving hand to new mothers and young families, and we will support adoption and foster care. We will protect women and vulnerable children." Vice President Vance said the task of the pro-life movement is to protect innocent life, defend the unborn, and to be pro-family and pro-life in the fullest sense of that word possible. Elaborating, he discussed knowing people who have faced unplanned pregnancy, and he drew a contrast between the pro-life movement and its support for women in unexpected pregnancy and the overall culture. Vice President Vance said, quote, "And I know how many of you in this crowd have devoted immeasurable time and resources to help answer these questions and to lend a hand to young people facing a moment of desperation." Decrying radical individualism and its negative effect on family life, Vice President Vance said society has failed to recognize the obligation that one generation has to another, that it's a core part of living in a society to begin with. Vice President Vance then went on to say something that was perhaps the most headline-grabbing line from the march. He said, quote, "So let me say very simply, I want more babies in the United States of America." This remark netted enthusiastic applause. Vice President Vance then said, quote, "It is the task of our government to make it easier for young moms and dads to afford to have kids, to bring them into the world and to welcome them as the blessings that we know they are here at the March for Life." But he didn't stop there. He also said, quote, "And I want to be clear that this administration stands by you. We stand with you." The crowd assembled on the National Mall gives an extraordinary example for the nation, he said, and continued with, quote, "You donate to diaper banks. You help find housing for those in need. You help fund the crisis pregnancy centers that give help to young women and young men in a time of crisis. You guys are the beating heart of the pro-life movement, and you have saved many lives already, and you're going to save more." The 2025 march was historic in having both Vice President Vance and President Trump address the crowd. President Trump was the first sitting president to appear at the march back in 2020. The 2025 march was the first public appearance for Vice President Vance since his swearing-in earlier in the week. Additionally, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis appeared and discussed the battle in his state to defeat the radical Amendment 4. And leaders of both chambers in the U.S. Congress, Senate Majority Leader John Thune and Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, also addressed the March for Life rally in person. This was a first. Speaker Johnson told the crowd that, quote, By sharing your time and influence, by volunteering to assist pregnancy resource centers, all the very practical ways we can assist, using our voices, using our influence, it's going to make a difference. Speaker Johnson shared how he was born a year before Roe v. Wade and that he was the product of an unplanned teen pregnancy. He said, quote, "I am so eternally grateful that my mom and dad ignored all the people who told them to just take care of that problem. And they chose to embrace life and to have me, the first of their 4 children." Speaker Johnson went on to say, quote, "It's a very simple fact that had they not done that, then I would not be here. And I often wonder who else we have missed and what those individuals might have contributed to our society and our world, but they were just never given the opportunity." Congressman Chris Smith from New Jersey said that the march was an engraved invitation to recommit and rededicate ourselves to the defense of the weakest and the most vulnerable. Representative Smith continued saying, quote, "To recommit with love and compassion, to tangibly assist women, especially through the extraordinary work of pregnancy care centers in order to protect their precious babies, but also to protect their lives." Representative Smith noted that just released Knights of Columbus Marist poll, which had found that 83% of Americans support pregnancy centers. In addition to the praise for pregnancy help, President Trump promised to reform the Department of Justice and to finally investigate the attacks on churches and pregnancy centers, saying specifically that the perpetrators would be brought to justice. Pregnancy Help News was also on the ground for the National Pro-Life Summit. Watch for coverage at pregnancyhelpnews.com and articles on Dr. Ben Carson's address to the summit, Kayleigh McEnany's talk, an interview with Kristen Hawkins, and interviews with our own abortion pill rescue team, who was exhibiting at the summit. So many things occur around the March for Life, but we got to make one visit that brings home the reason behind why we do what we do in Pregnancy Help. I had the privilege of visiting the Capitol Hill Pregnancy Center in Washington, D.C., and meeting there with Executive Director Janet Durig and some of her staff and volunteers. It was a blessing to be on site and watch these Pregnancy Help servants in action, serving women and their children, saving and changing lives. You may recall the Capitol Hill Pregnancy Center was in the news in 2022 following the leak of the Dobbs decision for being one of the first centers attacked by pro-abortion vandals. The center then had protesters disrupt its fundraising banquet. Janet and her team took necessary precautions to ensure safety and security for the center and its clients, and continued to serve in their life-affirming mission of helping women and families. They are a gem in our nation's capital, and they are an example of the thousands of pregnancy centers across the U.S. and the world that do this so very important work. We at Pregnancy Help News and Heartbeat International are blessed beyond measure to serve them and the entire pregnancy help community. We can be sure there will be more reporting to do on pro-life policy, but Pregnancy Help News will be there too to tell the individual stories, the personal testimonies, and the stories of pregnancy centers and medical clinics and maternity homes and adoption agencies that are making a difference in the world by serving women and children. Stay with us as we bring you these inspiring accounts, all of which are available to you 24/7 at pregnancyhelpnews.com. Always remember, we report on the pregnancy help community and for the pregnancy help community. Feel free to contact us with story ideas from your corner of the pregnancy help world. We want to hear from you. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Pregnancy Help News Brief. As always, we are so grateful to our host, Pregnancy Help Podcast. Subscribe to Pregnancy Help Podcast to be notified of our next episode and for all the great podcast content there. If you are not yet subscribed to the Pregnancy Help News Weekly Digest, we invite you to do so at pregnancyhelpnews.com. Whether with Pregnancy Help News or the Pregnancy Help News Brief and Pregnancy Help Podcast, stay tuned for more coverage of and for the pregnancy help community. Thank you again for joining us, and God bless you.